Welcome back.
Welcome to Decision Space, the only show to take place right here, in the space between the turns in your favorite games. I'm Jake Friedman.
And I'm Brendan Hansen.
And this is the podcast about decisions in games.
And in today's episode, we're talking all about revisiting games. We're going to explore what makes us want to revisit games we haven't played in quite a bit of time. What are some of the experiences that we've had recently revisiting games and our thoughts on those games? It's talking about games like Challengers, maybe a Euro game that Jake really enjoyed from last year that's also an engine building game with a rondel feel, a classic card game, and more.
Let me just say one hot take to start.
Okay.
I want to say replayable, being replayable, overrated. A game being revisitable, underrated. Maybe more important than replayable. So think about that as we go into our plug.
Literally adding it to the notes now. We're talking about it in the back half. But for now, Golden Geek 2023 nominations are open. Last year, all of you Decision Space listeners graciously took a few moments of your time and went on to Board Game Geek and nominated Decision Space for your podcast of the year. It meant an immense amount to us because we were officially nominated as one of the people in the running for the awards. And though we did not win, it was a huge boon for the show. If you've listened to Decision Space and enjoyed it this year, which hopefully is everyone here, we'd be
new
so
listeners
grateful.
Welcome.
Yes, new listeners welcome. We'd be so grateful for you to go on to Board Game Geek to the 2023 18th Annual Golden Geek Awards nominations and nominate Decision Space for your podcast of the year. We'll also note that nominations close Sunday, April 21st. So please, if you're listening to this when this episode comes out, just don't delay. Hop on and do it now. And also, if you need any Geek Gold, which there's a small hurdle, just message Jake or I on Board Game Geek or on our Discord. You can find a link to it in the show notes, or make sure you have all the gold you need to nominate Decision Space.
Yeah. If you're a Board Game Geek user, it should be really intuitive. If you're not, you can still participate. You just have to basically create a login on the website and then reach out to us, and we'll get you squared away. This is definitely the part of the year where it feels like we're like on our like NPR, like please everyone donate, but it really is important to us, and we just goes such a long way to helping us grow the show, which of course is what we want to do. So Golden Geeks happening now. Please go vote. If you have any questions about how to do that all, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you so much.
So with that, let's delve into revisiting games. So Jake, I thought we could just start with what makes you want to revisit a game you haven't played in some time. And that's just, to be really clear, what we're talking about with this episode is just playing games you haven't played in a long time.
So not replaying a game a bunch in quick succession.
Right.
But yeah, like when the time comes that you pull a game off your shelf, maybe even you dust it off a little bit because you haven't played it in quite some time. That's what we're talking about. That moment, how we get there, and what it's like to revisit games.
And I think for me, just in thinking about what makes me actually want to revisit games, I have more games than I would like to admit sitting on my shelves that I don't want to revisit. I have no desire to go back to them. I have a desire to move them out of my collection. But just for whatever reason, either I don't think other people would be interested in them. I haven't taken the time to post them officially for trades on Board Game Geek. And I haven't sort of taken to online marketplaces to sell them, whether it's Facebook or somewhere else. So they're just sort of sitting there as reminders of games I don't want to play. But I do have a few that sit there as these sort of shining boxes of hope.
What makes a game revisitable? What makes you want to go back to it after quite some time? And I think there's a category here is just external events. So I have a really good example of this is like there's a few games in my collection that are kind of there to be like spooky season games. I've got the Mansions of Madness 2nd edition game, which is literally only going to come out during the Halloween time of year when I feel like getting a little bit into the season. It's easy to pull people into that game at that time. I've also got The Hunger, a Richard Garfield game, which also feels like it's a newer to my collection, but another one that I probably am only hanging on to because I think it'll be great to pull out specifically at that time of year. So when I know it's starting to get towards the middle end of October, and all those scary movies are coming out. Something inside my brain's like, it's time to get these games out and give them another play after a long time on the shelf.
Nice. I think for me, the number one thing that makes me want to revisit a game is the game has a memorable quality. So either it's a mechanism that was really novel and stuck with me. Sometimes, Jake, you play a game, and you think, "Wow, that was a good experience. I really enjoyed my play of it. It's a solid 7 out of 10. I'm glad I played it. I'm glad I experienced it." But as a few years go on, maybe you look at the box and you sort of think, "I have a fond memory of this, but nothing about it stands out to me. I don't remember anything." And typically, those are not the games I want to go back to. The games that I want to revisit are the games where, on an idle walk around my neighborhood, just it pops into my mind, "Oh yeah, that String Railway Games was funky. It had this really cool mechanism, and I had that one play with Maya when we lived in Austin that we got in this weird argument about if you can stretch your string or not. Is it feasible to stretch your string while playing the game?" And just that makes me want to revisit it with my sort of the new frame of reference of all the games I've played since. Will I still sort of fondly remember it as much as will it be as good as I remember it fondly, right? Or is it just I almost have this nostalgia for this past play? But I think that's the biggest thing for me, is a memorable play or a memorable mechanism.
I'm going to stick on kind of like external things happening, because if I'm being realistic with myself, if there's a game that I haven't played for a while, generally there's something that prompts me to pulling it out again.
Yeah.
It's usually not an epiphany of like walking around, taking my dog on a walk, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh yeah, Eon's End. I like, I totally forgot about that game, and now it's like, it's so cool how you don't shuffle your deck, your discard pile, you just flip it over. But that could happen. But more likely it's an external event. And I think a big one for me, probably the number one reason I'll revisit a game, is because I have an opportunity to play games with people who I don't play with often. So that could be a new group of friends. It could be a new group of, it could be people who are newer to board games that have like reached out about it. Maybe new friends. Often I found games, of course, since I am who I am, as a great activity for like when my wife and I maybe meet new friends, and it's kind of like a good kind of like easy get to know you type of activity. Like, come over for dinner, we'll play a couple games. So opportunities like that tend to be times where I'm pulling games off the shelf to play in a new context with new people, but not necessarily the same games that I'm playing, on a week to week basis with my regular game group.
Yeah, totally. Or maybe a group that you played a game with, 10 years ago comes around again and you all want to just sort of re-experience it. Another reason that I find myself revisiting games is just there's a new way to play that makes it easy and accessible, right? So Dominion's a great example of this for me. I played a ton of Dominion about 10 years ago. Then I took a period away off, and then a new Dominion app came out. So I've revisited Dominion and had a great time with sort of revisiting that game. I was going to talk about it in this episode, but I pivoted, Jake, because I think I still have hope we might deep dive it on the show eventually.
Yeah, I think the last one I'll mention here is a game I could pull off the shelf again if it's like, for some reason, like in the news, or you know,
Mm.
and that could
The
be
board game news or the global news?
the board game news,
Okay,
right?
yeah,
Like it's like somehow it's like in the hotness again.
sure. Getting a reprint.
Maybe it's getting or has gotten an expansion, or sometimes designers will just put like, yeah, nobody's interested in a second edition, so here's some like new rules that I would encourage you to play with. That happened with a game I really enjoy called Transatlantic by Matt Gertz.
Mm,
Just randomly 3 years after release, he showed up on the Board Game Geek forums, was like, by the way, use these rules instead. Which is kind of like another demonstration of the fact that a board game is never truly finished being
yeah.
designed. You just eventually die. So yeah, I think that can trigger it, but it can be a double-edged sword, because like Dune Imperium Uprising came out and everybody's like, this rocks, and now I've got like the classic old 2-year-old version of Dune Imperium on myself, and now I want to play that less, I think,
Sure.
because it's not like the cool new
The
one.
shiny new one.
So it could
Yeah.
be a double-edged sword, but from time to time that has been a reason I've revisited a game.
Wyrmspan recently came out from Stonemaier Games, and that made me want to revisit Wingspan. So
That
you
made
and
me,
we played, yeah.
yeah, and I don't know, yeah. We played it online because of that, because I've had a great experience with Wyrmspan, but at the same time, I think I'll be less inclined to play my copy of Wingspan, which is a game It's actually like maybe a really good segue into my comment before about replayability being not the best, or being overrated, and revisitable games being underrated, because I think Wingspan is a perfect example of a game that when it came out, I played it a ton, right? I was like showing it to new people, having a great time with it, probably played it my copy on the table 10 plus times, and then it just went on the shelf and like never came back.
Sure.
And I don't really know, exactly why that happens with games, but sometimes I find games where I like pick them up, and that's not to say I'm not like happy with the purchase. If I play a game that I bought 10 times, I see that as like a huge win, like a really good value. But I'll play it a bunch initially, and then it's a game that I never really come back to. Where I would much rather have my collection full of games that are revisitable, in the sense that maybe I play it once or twice when I get it, but then it's a game I'm pulling out like once or twice every year, right? When the situation arises. And I do think there's a distinction between the qualities of a replayable game, a game that you can play a bunch of times and it will feel like different and exciting each time, and a revisitable game being one that comes out regularly but over a much longer interval.
So lay it out for me. What's the hypothesis on what makes a game more revisitable versus replayable? And I guess if for replayability, we have a whole episode on replayability
Right.
that people should go listen to. But what makes a game revisitable?
Yeah, a great question. I don't think it's like a clear answer. I think
Yeah.
it's just like the conversation we had in the replayable, where it's like there's a bunch of things that can make a game revisitable, and if it has many of these qualities, there's a good chance it would fit, but without there being like one comprehensive definition.
Unifying. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, being tied in with a season can be helpful, right? Like, I think there is like a niche of Halloween season games that a lot of publishers have tapped into. And I think, once you get it into your head that like this is something that I do this time of year, or you could think about, over the holidays, right? Like a lot of families create tradition of like maybe we play Ticket to Ride every Christmas or whatever as like part of your thing, like a game that can kind of fit into there. Maybe it's a Christmas themed game. I know there are some of those running around too. I think that's something that can make it more revisitable. I think there is an important category about like sticky rules.
Yeah.
I think when I'm looking at my shelf of games and picking which ones to bring out, I find myself after a long period of time, if I find myself more rapidly going to games that are kind of like in the medium light, like the light side of the medium category. I think that's gonna be different for everybody, of kind of like what's your like sweet spot for like fun, engaging gameplay and sticky rules. But for me, it's kind of like the Tikals and like Findorffs of the world, which are like games that I kind of would classify as medium, but like light medium. And then the last thing I would say for revisitable game, which I think is tremendously important too, is that they're games that make me say, like, I want to know what's going to happen when I play this game. And I think that is speaking to like a huge range of possible outcomes. This is something I've talked about a lot on this podcast, where you could play a game of Bruges, and you could score 120 points, or you could score 40 and it'd be the same player with the same skill set, just because there's like so much variability in like the way the game plays out. I think that is a hallmark for me of a game that's more revisitable versus a game that I may love, like the Castles of Burgundy, but that offers like a much flatter kind of experience. Like when I'm pulling out Castles of Burgundy, honestly, it's not one I've pulled out in a really long time, because I think I just know the experience that I'm going to get out of it, and that makes it less exciting. I want to like pull something on myself where I don't know what it's going to kind of yield from the play experience.
That ties into exactly the comment I was going to make about both Wingspan and now you've added Castles of Burgundy to the list somewhat here, Jake, is that I think I feel much more my desire to revisit a game versus replay a game, right? To revisit a game is so much higher when I think there's still something more for me to learn about the game through playing it again, right? I have a vague sense for the experience I'm going to have playing Wingspan whenever I sit down to play Wingspan. I know what I'm gonna get out of that, and sometimes that's just what I want. But I've played it enough now that I don't think that it's something that I want to revisit too often. But I find myself, even with games like The Fox and the Forest, a small box trick taking card game for 2 players, that Maya and I will let that game lay fallow for a year and a half, and then we'll just get the Fox fever and need to scratch that itch and go back to it. And every time we play, there's just a little something new we learn about the game. The special powers come into play in a slightly different way that informs how we think about how you can approach it. And that's a pretty narrow decision space. That game's not huge. It's a small box trick taking game. But again, I still feel like I'm learning about the game. So I guess in that way, I don't feel like I've fully explored it. And that's another key thing about revisitability.
Yeah. I want to make a caveat here in that when I say revisitable games is more important to me than replayable games, a big part of that is because that's like coming from the privileged position that I own over 100 games. If I
Sure,
owned
yeah.
3 games and I was just getting the board game hobby, I would want a game that, I could play 20 times consecutively and not get bored of it. Like that's where like a really replayable game shines. But I just know that I'm not going to be doing that almost with any game that comes out now. So that just has, this is more speaking to like my relationship with games as I, grow in this hobby and what I'm looking for, so I don't want to like have that come across as like a totally universal rule, but I think it's true of me. And I think it's true of a lot of other board gamers that have been in the hobby a while, even if they haven't maybe
Yeah.
stated it to themselves in the same way. And I think an example of that is of even like replayability and revisitability being something that can almost like be at loggerheads with each other are like the proliferation of like campaign and legacy games. Those are
Mm.
games that are like on their face very replayable, but
Designed to be, yeah.
designed to be, right? If you think of Pandemic Legacy, right? That's a very replayable game, right? Designed to be played 12 times at a minimum to like have the game experience, but it is not a revisitable game. I don't know
Yep.
of anyone who's played through that campaign multiple times.
Yeah.
And I think the same of, most campaign games, other legacy games. We love My City, but we love the Eternal game is revisitable. For me, the campaign is not. I have no interest in, doing that ever
Twice was enough
again.
for me, for sure.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So, I think that does speak to the fact that like these are different qualities that a game can have.
I think it's really cogent too, Jake, that you sort of identified that revisitability might be even more meaningful. And that's coming from someone who loves replayability in games. We couldn't do this show if you didn't love replaying games, right?
Right.
And we couldn't do the show if I didn't love replaying games. But I do think in terms of thinking about the type of collection of board games I want to have on hand, I think you're right. For me too, I want games that I can revisit because the structure of how I play games right now is not such that I can replay them as often as I'd like. Outside of maybe certain instances where I just have a game that I'm going to play with Maya, my wife, over and over and over again, and over the course of maybe a month or 2 or 3.
Yeah. And I think important to add in this conversation on revisiting games and revisitability in games is I do think Board Game Arena has also changed the landscape a little bit, where if there's a highly replayable game on Board Game Arena, like that's where I want to play it because that's where I'll be able to like find games and play it a bunch
Replay.
of times.
Yeah.
Not true on the table. So I think maybe what this, to your point, I do value replayability as well, but I think I
But it
value
gets a
it
bump.
less in my physical collection
Yeah.
than I do in my, kind of
Digital play
digital
life.
access or whatever
Yeah.
to games.
Awesome. Well, Jake, as we begin to sort of close out this conversation on replayability and just pivot to talking about games we've recently
You mean
revisited.
revisitability?
Yes, did I say replayability?
Yeah.
God darn it. Let's revisit that. As we finish this conversation about revisitability and pivot into talking about 3 games we've recently revisited and some thoughts on them. Gosh, what a mouthful. I was curious, Jake, do you ever revisit games you don't like? Is that something you've ever actively wanted to do? Sort of said, oh, I played that game and everyone else likes it, but I remembered having a terrible experience. I want to play it one more time.
I think less and less,
Yeah.
and maybe I'm just becoming like more confident in my
In
own
your
taste.
taste. Yeah.
I definitely get the peer pressure, right? Of like, I mean, basically our part 2 of Tigris and Euphrates episode came about because like, it's like, why don't I like enjoy this game when
Yeah.
everybody else, seems to like be able to like identify a greatness that like I haven't found, in my own enjoyment of the game. So I'm definitely not immune to it, but yeah, I guess maybe I'm also just kind of like a little bit headstrong too about what I tend to like and not like.
Yeah, I'm pretty squarely a no. I would rather
Okay.
just play something new. I feel like the opportunity cost of playing games is high enough that if I have a really terrible experience, I don't think 6 months or a year later, I'm typically going to say, "Oh yeah, I want to give that one another shot." I will. I guess I'm not against it. I guess philosophically, I just there's so many games to play. Just play something
Yeah,
else.
I think it takes like something external again, like
Yeah, yeah, a
if
friend.
if a friend's like, I'm dying to play this again, like of
Sure.
course,
Yeah, let's do
but
it.
also like it could be like, oh no, there actually are some like rules changes, right?
Right.
Like something that you maybe didn't like about this has actually been like tweaked, or there's like a suggested like setup. And one thing we haven't talked about is a lot of games offer various modes of play, and
Sure.
that can be a reason where I would try something again that I didn't like, and it could also just be a reason that a game is revisitable because I want to try a different variant or whatever.
Let's play Broom Service and use the back of the board, or Broom Service and
Exactly.
use the clouds, or Broom Service and use the amulets, or gosh, that game's so revisitable.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so
Awesome.
modules revisitable, campaigns replayable. It's different.
Boom. That's the philosophy.
All
Okay.
right.
Let's talk about games we've recently revisited, Jake, and some things maybe that we've learned about revisiting games, or even just the games themselves, which I think could be an interesting exercise as well. Because for me, so much of the experience of revisiting games is about challenging assumptions that I have about the game or what I think about it in some ways.
Yeah, sounds good. So should I jump in with my first one?
Yeah.
Okay, so this game already came up in this episode. It's Findorff by Friedemann Friese. And I think Findorff is a notable revisitable game for me at this point because it's a game that I keep wanting to show to new groups.
Mm,
And I don't know if we explicitly mentioned that in our prior discussion, but like when a game is like, I just like has something that's like, I just want to show
mm,
this to people, that makes it something revisitable because when I have a chance to play with new people, I'm going to go to that. Another
yeah,
game that falls really well into this category for me is The Mind. Like everybody who hasn't played The Mind, like I just want to be the one to show it to them because I think it's so cool when people experience The Mind for the first time.
totally.
So Findorff falls into that for me because I think the thing that is just like so neat about it to me is that it's this game that's been designed and developed not from the same perspective or lens that it feels like all other kind of like modern Euro economic or just modern Euro games period are for like usability and cleanliness and like clarity. And Findorff has, kind of said, we are going to go less for that and more for like historical accuracy, which makes it, at the end of the day, like a very clean, mechanistically designed economic Euro game, but one that just has like a slightly different feel than any other one I've played. And I just like to show people that and have them experience it. It's also benefited by the fact that it's kind of like the perfect weight for me
Yeah,
to show somebody as like, this is a full on like game night game, but it has like the rules are easy to teach. They're really sticky. It's got just 4 actions in the whole game, and also it's flexible player count. You can play, it plays great at 2, it plays great at 5, and all those games take about an hour and change to play. So it has like the sticky rules, it has maybe the flexibility so that when I have the opportunity to show it to new people, it's going to work well, is another reason. And it's a game that I keep loving. And the last thing I'll say about it is it has this like draft variant setup where you can choose to like, basically the game is all about developing the city of Findorff. You use a rondel to select actions, whether you're manufacturing resources, you're using those resources to purchase things, you're selling your raw resources for money, or you're getting more workers that will be able to, use in the
grow your
manufacturing
town.
action. That's pretty much the whole game. You go around that rondel over and over, but the whole goal is to like build the structures, which are like, the city hall of Findorff.
The
They're like
cemetery.
the cemetery. They're real places that really existed. And they all have like these wildly powerful effects that change your engine. And so it's really fun each time. Like that's kind of where the excitement comes in for me of like, I want to see how this is going to happen. Kind of the way those play out leads to a really different feel for the game. So anyway, there's a variant where you can choose to draft those cards as the setup instead of doing like kind of preset packets. And each time I play this game, I'm kind of like hoping to have the opportunity to do it. But each time I'm bringing out, I'm showing it to new people. So I never have. So even though I've like now played this game like 5 or 6 times over a matter of a year, I still want to get out because like I personally am still wanting to like explore that draft. So I'll be at Geekway coming up in just a few weeks, a month now, where I'll be hanging out with a lot of other Decision Space listeners and from our Discord community. So if you happen to be there, please reach out. Let's play some games. But anyway, I put that as like my game onto our list of like wanting to play this specifically with that draft variant. So another way that is like feeling revisitable to me. That's Findorff.
Findorff is just incredibly charming. There's something about that game that I just look at and you can tell that it was designed for such a point of affection for its source material, or just for the aesthetic. I don't know. And I love how the board is almost abstract. The board, you're adding pieces to the board. It sort of says, add this building in this general area, right? It's just, it's such an interesting game with cool ideas that does feel so different than a lot of things. Even if mechanically at its heart, it's not unfamiliar. It's an engine building game, but it's an engine building game from some alternate Friedman Freeze universe, which I guess is just the universe in which we all know what Findorff is.
Just Germany.
Yeah, just Germany. Great. Okay, so a game that I've recently revisited, longtime listeners of the show will know that last year, actually, Jake just mentioned Geekway. I'm going to mention Geekway to the West, a convention that we both really enjoy. We played Challengers, a large auto battler card game that went on to win the Kenner Spiel des Jahres last year. And I played this game maybe 250 times in 2023 and then took, I would say, 6 months off from playing it or so, a while for a game I really enjoy and have access to playing readily on Board Game Arena. And recently, in part thanks to someone, I think Aurora, hosting a Challengers tournament in the Decision Space Discord, and in part just because of how much I've been enjoying drafting games lately, I've revisited Challengers. And I was a little nervous. So I sort of thought, what if I didn't still love Challengers quite as much as I thought I did? And I learned that's absolutely not the case. I think this game is awesome. And revisiting it has reminded me of a few things that I think are also really wonderful about it, that when I talk about it casually, I don't always appreciate it, which I've, in my memory, come to think about how great the card pool system is, how neat it is that it's structured as a tournament, how cool it is that the resolution is tense and dramatic and theatric in a way, with just the flipping of cards off the top of the deck. But one thing that I just forgot is how at the core of Challengers, and what really takes the game from being a good game to a great game, is how interesting the core system of the bench is. It's a game that the bench is this: whenever you battle someone, you have 6 slots, duplicates of your cards go onto your bench and pile up on each other. So you have an incentive to play duplicate copies of the same cards in your deck, so that you can get more cards out while battling with your opponent before your bench fills up and you effectively lose. And I think that the bench doesn't seem exciting, but it's just this essential glue. And in revisiting the game, it's so good. Every sort of small-ish, lightish game, I think, needs a system as strong as Challengers to be truly great as that bench system.
Yeah, I've also been just playing this a ton lately after I guess some time away and having just an absolute blast with it. I still think this game's amazing. And I think it fits into the revisitable category as well as replayable
Yeah.
clearly. So maybe that kind of like is a strike against my like these two things being at opposite ends. I think I get clearly a game can have both to me. But I think what makes it like particularly revisitable on that side of things is the fact that like it has just wildly swingy outcomes.
Yeah.
Luke, who's in a member of the Laughing Table Friends, my Monday night game group, had an interesting thread. He was talking about Challengers in our Discord, saying that he's played this game 2,000 times now, but it's not in his top it's never been in his top 3 games, and so he's like, has anybody else had have their like most played game like not in their top 3 or whatever. And I was like, basically kind of poking him, be like, how could that, how could you say this if this is, you've played it 2,000 times, like I've heard enough. And he said, and his criticism with the game, or he was saying it wasn't a 10 to him, a 10 out of 10. And I was like, how could it not be a 10 out of 10 if you played it that much? And he said, like, his criticism was that, like, sometimes no matter what you do, like, your deck just doesn't work out. Like, you could, make all the right decisions, your deck doesn't work out. And
That's life.
I think that's what makes this game great. Like,
Yep.
every time you boot it up, you have no idea what's going to happen. Like, yes, every time I play it, I'm confronted with interesting decisions, which is amazing after playing 200 times. Like, I generally like, do I go 1 B card here or 2 A cards? Like, and which cards to take and which cards to tuck. It's just like riddled with interesting decisions. But the reason I want to like fire up each game is just like, because I just still don't know, like, is this a game where I get last place because I just like can't find anything, or is this the game where the 1 in 100 deck comes together and I just steamroll everybody, and it's the same guy playing it, and either result
Yep.
could happen. I think that just makes me want to click that play again button over and over again.
Totally. Another thing about Challengers revisiting it that's so great is sometimes revisiting games can act as a sort of refresh for when decision spaces become stale. So
Mm-hmm.
if you make the same, our brains like to find solutions and then reuse those solutions over and over again to solve problems, right? It feels good. You figure out how to do something, you just want to keep doing it that way as long as it succeeds. So I found with Challengers 200 plus plays in, and I wonder if Luke feels this way at all, sometimes Challengers is a game that really wants you to play flexibly. You cannot force a strategic path. And I had gotten to the point when I was playing ardently and a lot where I was sort of forcing strategic paths and not having as much fun with it as I wish I was. And I found that revisiting it, taking a break, has totally refreshed my perspective because I don't remember my past opinions on cards outside of, oh, that card's good, which is just enough, right? Like I used to have more nuanced opinions about a lot of things where it's sort of like, okay, if this specific pair of cards comes up, I'm going to draft these cards and try to pivot into this strategy. And now it's sort of, I get to meet the game all over again,
Yeah,
rediscover. It's great.
awesome, great game.
Cool.
Yeah, and I'm having so much fun playing with people in the Discord. Like, I have a bunch of games going on Board Game Arena, and every time I like, you click on the button, and it'll
Do you
take you
go
to your
straight to
first game.
Challengers?
Well, I'm hoping
Oh,
Challengers
okay.
pops up. I'm like,
What?
I hope this is because I want, I'm like so excited to see what's gonna happen in the games.
Totally. I've been going to Board Game Arena and then I click out of whatever my first game is and I just click on Challengers and take my Challengers turn first. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
so it's good. We're junkies. Okay. The next one I want to talk about, I revisited after a long time of not playing it for a really specific reason, and that is Riftforce, another game by the company we were just talking about, One More Time Games, their other game. And clearly, this is a company whose design ethos really fits in with what I'm looking for in games. Another interesting question that came in on the Discord recently was like, is there a publisher that you're like really into? Um, and even though this company's only had 2 games published so far, they were the first one that came to mind for me. Where it's like, if this company publishes a game like sight unseen, I want to try it out. But anyway, we're talking about Riftforce now. And Riftforce is a kind of classic lean battling game with the twist that you at the beginning you have like different elements. Your deck will be made up of 3 different elemental types, and you draft those out before each game, so you can create all kinds of like interesting synergies and combos. And there's a lot to discover in the game. Similarly, has that challenger's feeling of certain combos just like don't work out. Your deck doesn't come out in the right order, so you can be learning a lot about the game and still doing terribly in any given game. But the reason I wanted to revisit this one and brought it back out to the table is because for a long time I've owned the Beyond Riftforce Beyond expansion, and I just kind of shuffle in the new elementals into the draft. And I've played a couple of games 1v1 like that, but this expansion also adds in the 2v2 mode. And that was the particular reason I wanted to bring this game out. We had a kind of a Saturday game day with the Laughing Table friends, and this was a game I pulled off myself after a long time, specifically for that reason, to try out the 2v2 mode. And it's really interesting. You have like a slightly longer rift. So instead of having 5 lanes that you're battling over, it's 6. And then when you do, so this game has 3 actions. You'll remember, Brendan, or maybe other listeners have listened to our coverage of this game on this podcast. If not, go check it out. But you have 6 rift spaces. So the actions in the game are you can either play down elementals, or you can activate elementals, or the third action is check and draw. And when you do that, if you have any elementals uncontested, your opponent has no elementals in the lane across from them, each of those scores 1 point. So basically, the only difference in the 2-player game is when you're doing the check and draw action, you're only looking at the 3 rifts in front of you. So you can still
Interesting.
play your elementals all over to help out your opponent, or your teammate rather, and you can even activate your opponent's elementals not by type but by number, which can lead to some like really crazy lines too, where you could activate like up to 6 different types of elementals in a round, which is pretty rad.
Yeah.
So yeah, we just played it once and it worked really well. It was a ton of fun. I think all of them were new players besides me, so I definitely had like a big advantage just having played it a lot. But I mean, it was cool, and I was happy to revisit it for the purpose of trying out that mode.
That sounds so cool that you can have your teammates' cards played in your lane and activate them off number. So you can it's sort of like an off-color activation. That's really
It was cool.
That's clean design. That's
the
neat.
only thing that was like a little funky about it is like the rule book's like really vague about what you can and can't say to your teammates. Like you can communicate, but like don't tell them, like don't tell them to play that card. But it's sort of, so I didn't know how to take that. Like,
interesting.
My Tyler's like putting a 5 down in the middle lane, and I'm like nodding.
I guess they're probably just saying don't just tell your teammate what to do. Yeah,
right.
That's interesting. That's cool. So that's Riftforce from One More Time Games. Awesome. The next game I recently revisited. Listeners of the show who checked out our drafting episodes, particularly the second one, which Jake and I both feel is a really awesome episode on closed information drafting games, will know that I've recently been playing a lot of Magic the Gathering. Magic the Gathering is a game that I've revisited a lot over the course of my life. It's not a game that I typically spend more than 6 months or so playing and really sinking my time into, but when it gets me good. So it's a game I played a ton as a teenager, and I took about 10 years off, played it a little bit, then took another decade off, and played a little more, then took 2 years off, then played a little more. So I guess it's slowly gaining ground again. But I recently decided I wanted to play a bunch of Limited, which is a way that you can draft the most recent Magic the Gathering set, build a deck of cards of 40 cards, and play it in a series of games online on Magic the Gathering Arena. And Wizards of the Coast, the publisher of Magic, makes it really easy to revisit their game because every 3 months there's a whole brand new set. It's almost like a brand new game that you already know the rules to play. So in terms of sticky rules, either you get to, how to play, or the rules are printed on the card. So they're literally as sticky as could be. And I think that makes coming back to Magic easy, right? It's new, but familiar. And that makes revisiting fun. But I'll also say another thing that I love about Magic and that makes it easy to revisit, and I've had an amazing time revisiting Magic, is that every set is designed to challenge assumptions that you already have about the game, right? Every set of cards kind of pushes or pulls in different directions that test the heuristics that you think you know about the game. So normally when you think, oh, this would be a good situation to block in, specifically in the most recent set that I've playing, Jake, Murders at Karloff Manor, combat tricks are really good. And combat tricks are cards that so in Magic, you're playing as 2 wizards dueling, and you send these creatures that you've summoned against your opponent to try to attack them. And your opponent gets to choose if they'll block that with one of their creatures or not, which could have very dangerous consequences for them if you have what's called a combat trick, where you change something fundamentally about your creature for 1 turn. And I think that I've loved that combat tricks are really good in Murders of Karloff Manor because it makes for really fun decisions around blocking and attacking, right? It's very exciting to sort of be able to bluff and sort of show a copy. I like playing best of 3 because you can do a little bit more turn-to-turn bluffing, where if someone knows I have a card in my deck, to act in such a way that they think that maybe I have that in my hand when I don't. I've really, revisiting Magic this time, Jake, has made me realize how core the bluffing of the game of Magic is and how essential the mana system is to the bluffing. And what I mean by this is in Magic, obviously people talk about this mana system a lot. You get energy to spend on cards by playing lands to the table. When you have those lands, when you use them, you tap them and turn them to the side to show they've been used, and you can't use them until you untap them at the start of your next turn. So whenever you have lands that are untapped, you're showing that you have the potential to do something, so long as you have cards in your hand, right? You're saying to your opponent, I could still be doing something. I didn't spend my mana this turn. And it could be that you just don't have anything that you can do. You don't have cards that you can play at that given point in time where you can interact, but you might. And you can act in such a way that you do when you don't, or maybe make a play where you don't do something that it seems like you should do if you had a certain card in your hand, even though you have the card in your hand, to set them up to make a bad decision on the next turn. And I think that this Magic really has the reason why I think Magic is still around and is still as popular as it is. It'd be hard to attribute to any one thing. I think that would be silly, given how expansive the game is and how many vectors on which the game really succeeds, from its amazing art to its cool story. But I think at its core is this bluffing system is really good. And I found that what I've enjoyed most about the games that I've played is just the conversations that you get to have through having mana left up and forcing your opponent into guessing situations. And I love these type of simultaneous choice games, and it's really popped in this most recent set for me. So I've really enjoyed revisiting Magic recently. And a new set comes out today, Jake. So if you want to revisit it with me,
oh wow,
you
maybe
can jump in.
Man, as you're talking, I'm like, that does sound fun. It's just so damn expensive. It's like,
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about doing like drafts a lot. It's like $10 or $14 to do one.
Well, okay, so I spent. This is so annoying. Let me talk about the economics of Arena for one
I
second.
mean, I just want to put that out there, right? Like, it's not like
It's not a free
Hearthstone
experience.
or whatever where you
Yeah.
just can do whatever and then it's free.
But you
Unless you
probably
choose
you're
to pay.
overstating it a little bit, because I
Okay.
spent $100 and got 20,000 gems, and it cost 1,500 to draft. But whenever you play, you get gems back, and if you don't
So the
often
better you
get,
do, the more you can do it.
yeah, and realistically, it's almost impossible unless you're sort of the top 1% of players in the world to ever just play infinitely. But I can probably play 30 drafts off of $100, and that's
Okay.
been. And I'm still kind of in that period. So when we get to that, I'll sort of say, do I want to sink another 100 into this? Probably not. But yeah,
that actually like feels better to me to be like, I will spend $100 to have a bunch of Magic experience,
play for a month or two,
as opposed to just like, here's my credit card wizard. Every time I click draft or whatever, it's 15.
No, that'd be,
which is what it
wild.
is, or more if you're drafting in person, right?
Yeah.
That's what it used to be back in the day when I was drafting twice a week. Thank you, Mom and Dad.
Yeah, totally. But then you get the cards. You get the physical cards.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Which now probably have little value because you're drafting lots of commons and uncommons. But that's okay.
Yeah. One thing I've revisited recently is the Legends of Runeterra, which is the card game by the Riot Games, the League of Legends people. And I've just been doing like the solo mode on there, which is both fun and also just, I don't know. It's just like for somehow like missing something for me to where I get to the end of the game, and if I win, I'm just kind of like, that was cool, but I said that was an hour of my life that I'm never getting back or whatever, or less, but I don't know.
Because it has the ticking up mana system of Hearthstone, which takes so much of the interest and variability out of the game.
I think you're right. I think that is the reason that these individual games I'm playing against the computer aren't that exciting, is because all of them follow the same arc where it's like, eventually I curve out and overtake my opponent, or I don't.
Yep. Which in Magic, sometimes you only get 3 lands and somehow you win.
Yeah, because your opponent got 1.
or you're just playing, red, white, beat down.
Yeah.
Okay, one final comment, because whenever Magic comes up, we always end up talking about mana flood or mana screw. And I will say, Jake, another thing about revisiting Magic that's pleasantly surprised me is how much fixing there is. Mm-hmm. I don't get mana screwed that much in these sets. Certainly not as much as I did when I was drafting as a kid. And I would build my deck poorly and the sets weren't designed in a way to support it. Like, it just doesn't happen that much to me.
Yeah.
I don't know.
You also have a longer view now, right?
That's true.
Yeah. But anyway, we've hashed that out before. And the next game on my list, the last one I wanted to bring up, is an even older game than Magic the Gathering, if you can believe that, Brendan.
I can't. There's games before Magic.
not any good ones. Or so I thought. Games. So this is Spades. I have a group of friends from undergrad that meets once a month or so to play some games. And we've been playing, this is kind of a new thing. It's been a really fun way to reconnect with these guys. And we've been playing games on Board Game Arena. And one of the guys, kind of a willing participant, but acts like he can't understand the rules well, even though he can, the type. He basically was like, if we ever want to just play like classic card game, that'd be awesome too. And I was like, well, it looks like they have Spades on Board Game Arena. So we decided to try that. And I've played Spades before, but certainly not in the last 10 years, right? Like as a kid on like a family vacation or like visiting my cousins or something, I have like a vague memory of like, sitting around the kitchen table and playing Spades, and we've got like the pen and paper out and we're like counting up everybody's scores.
Because you played at 500.
Yeah, we played at 500, which is, man, that's a lot of points, let me tell you. But so I think, maybe from that experience as a kid and just kind of dragging along, and at the start of this podcast, right, I would have told you like I don't really enjoy trick-taking games, but slowly...
The start of making this podcast.
Yeah, the start of creating Decision Space 3 years ago. I would have said I don't really like trick-taking games, but since that time, we've kind of hit this trick-taking renaissance. I've been influenced by people around me who really love trick-taking games. I've played more in more interesting designs. And the one that really started it for me was like Nikosu Dice. I was showed that by our friend and previous guest on the podcast, Pete Wissinger, and that kind of like made something in my head click, like that this type of mechanism, when used in an interesting way, can be really awesome. And since that time, I've been having a lot more fun playing trick-taking games, and I think just approaching them with a more open mind to liking them has helped a lot. So all of that brings me to revisiting Spades after such a long time, and kind of being like the original culprit of what made me think I don't like trick-taking games. And I have to tell you, I had an awesome time playing Spades.
Nice.
Yeah, it's a ton of fun. I mean, it's as bare bones. I mean, I guess Hearts is more bare bones, but if you don't know Spades, it's a classic 52 card deck trick-taking game where you have a partner and you're trying to, everybody makes bids and you're trying to like reach your combined bid to score points. If you go over, you can get bags, and once you accumulate enough of them, you can get negative points. You can try and go nil to get some bonus points, but basically it's just your bare bones trick-taking game. And I think after playing like so many interesting riffs on it, whether it's Nikosu Dice that adds dice drafting to the game, or Tricky Time Crisis, another one of my favorites that adds like a cooperative element, and then all of a sudden somebody is the big bad and you're trying to team up against that, or Schadenfreude, which is a game which is just absolutely insane. Like all of those use this core Spades trick-taking element, and having experienced all that, and then coming back to Spades and just like getting to experience this classic form of trick-taking without all the frills. It did go a bit long for me because we played all the way up to 500. So we were probably playing Spades for like 45 minutes or an hour. But it was really fun, and it definitely like I was able to sort of like see it with new eyes, and I was glad that I had revisited. So I guess that is an example of trying a game again that I thought I didn't like the first time around, but enough time had passed to give it another go.
Spades is my favorite game of all time, so I revisit Spades quite often.
Do you like it?
There's some games that are meditative in the way that they play, and I think Spades falls into that category for me. I like Spades. I wouldn't say I love Spades because I will never win Spades, because Maya will win every single game of Spades.
You got to be on Maya's team.
That's true. It
seems like a surefire strategy.
It is a surefire strategy. It's the way to go. She just played it on her phone, falling asleep, I think probably like 10,000 times over the course of the last decade. So it's just a game that I think is in the stratosphere of my life very much. I think Spades is fun, Jake, but I agree that the bidding, I don't know. Spades is cool, but there's no tricks. It's just a good game.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Should we close out with this final game from Kramer and Kiesling, 1999 Spiel des Jahres winner that we've covered on the show. We've talked about the show a lot because Jake and I love this.
I think we could still deep dive it at some point.
Do you think we should? I think we probably should. So we're talking about Tikal. Tikal is a really interesting game because it is a strategy Euro game from a very different design ethos than exists today. You have 10 action points on your turn and a menu of actions that you can take. This is this sort of design evolutionary dead end in some ways, because this setup of a game leads to a really interesting decision space where players have tons of agency and can make meaningful and varied decisions. No two games ever play out the same, but it also leads to potentially really long games that reward players for thinking really, really hard about every single turn they take. And there's just so many options to consider that you could sink hours into playing a game that really should probably be played in an hour and a half or less. Tikal recently came to Board Game Arena, so Jake and I have had the opportunity to revisit it virtually for the first time. I'd only previously played Tikal on the table, maybe eight or 10 times, and now I'm playing it virtually. And I will say, when Jake and I first played it on the table together, we said, oh, this would be amazing virtually,
I
because you
know.
could really puzzle your turns out. And I'm curious, Jake, has that been your experience?
I mean, we bemoaned the fact that it wasn't on Board Game Arena then, and now that it is, it's in alpha, I think. So it might not be available to everyone, unless you like have that alpha reviewer status.
Yep.
But yeah, it's awesome on Board Game Arena. I love kind of taking as long as I want to think through the possible implications of 10 actions, undoing them, redoing them. I mean, that's just great puzzly fun.
Yeah.
And I'll also add, even before it was on Board Game Arena, I think like there's something, maybe it was because it was on Arena, but it was like there was something in the air, right? People were like talking about Tikal again. So it was my pick the last time I got to choose for the Laughing Table Friend game night. And we decided to play Tikal with the draft variant, the auction variant, where
Auction. Yeah.
yeah, so instead of just drawing a random tile off the top, which you then can place on the board to kind of organically grow out the board that you'll be playing territory or area majority scoring on, you instead flip up one for each player in the game, and then auction for the right to choose and take your turn then, which added a really interesting twist to the game. I think we had talked about it and been like, who would ever need that? It just seems like so much. And I think that was kind of our feeling. It When we played it, it definitely added downtime it just added length to the game because we had to think about it, but didn't really feel like it was changing things too much for us with our understanding. Like I was bidding zero a lot and just taking
Mm,
whatever was left over and kind of letting the other two players spend their points to take something. But the more that I've been kind of playing it the old way and thinking about that, I think now that we have this version on Board Game Arena, I think Board Game Arena has both versions, but like I would always pick the non-auction variant for asynchronous play.
yeah.
Now that I've had that and played that more, and I've learned more about the game since that on the table play, it makes me again want to go back to revisit it once more with the auction way again. So it kind of has this interesting kind of dance where the two different versions are making me want to play the other version again more whenever I play the game.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think for me, the revisitability, gosh, it's like a train wreck in my mouth every time it comes out, of Tikal is so much so that the game can ebb and flow in really different directions based on the order those tiles come out. In one of the most recent plays that we had, within our meta, we've all kind of decided that treasure is really good, right? You want to get treasure early, stack up the points because you get to score them every round, ideally get some sets early, and then treasure increasingly gets less good as the game goes on. But I love that every time you play, right, that's going to be true to varying degrees based on the order that tiles come out. There's these different sets of tiles, though. So you always have roughly this group of tiles in the first part of the game, roughly this group of tiles in the middle, and roughly this group in the last. And I think that sort of structure where there is variability within each part of the game, the beginning, the middle, and the end, but it still has an arc designed by the designers, hits this nice middle ground that makes the game more revisitable than it would be if it wasn't. Because I think if it was just such that Tikal was a more random game, a more variable game as a thought experiment, you just shuffled everything up, that would make it more replayable probably. I don't need Tikal to be even more replayable than it is, but that might make it even more replayable. But I don't think it would be as revisitable because I think whoever was the best player at Tikal would just always win in those situations. Or I don't know. Do you know what I'm kind of getting at? It's nice because you know what you're going to get out of a given game.
My instinct would be the opposite, like almost, right? Where, because that's sort of what I was talking about, the revisitable games being like anything can happen, like crazy chaos tends to make things more revisitable, whereas like the clean developed play experience might make it more replayable initially. But then something you said there. So I think I would tend to disagree with that assessment, but
okay, say revisitable.
Yeah, no. Maybe we should have called it. I was thinking about like, should we call this returnable games? But then that sounds like games you want to like take back to the store. Yeah. Like, give me my money back.
Yeah.
But I think what makes Tikal, revisitable,
nice.
Is the fact that it's like the ultimate trying to zig while other people zag games. Like treasure is good if you're getting a lot of it, but if everybody's going for it, then probably the better thing to be doing is, focusing on like building up temples and getting board control. And I think another dominant meta was forming where like you rush out to get prime tent placement in the middle of the board, and people are doing that. And our most recent game we played together, Brendan, I won. I got hardly any treasure. I never built my tent. I'm going to show you a picture. Look at what I've done here, dude. I'm just only at base camp.
Yeah. Who needs to build a camp when all you do is camp?
I just stayed at the base. I'm at like the two temples to the right, the two temples to the left of base camp. I've got them built up to 10 high, 8 high, 4 and 5. I just scored them every game without capping any of them. People just kind of like let me do it because they were going
Meanwhile,
crazy.
William was building a tent all in the middle of nowhere, coming after where I had built a tent in the middle of nowhere. I spent all this time building a temple up to an 8 or a 9.
You guys have all these tents in the middle of nowhere.
He walks over and puts this guy right on top. I was like, no.
And it's fun too, because like while you guys are doing that on my turn, since I don't really care about the tiles I'm drawing, I'm just making the board as big of a hellscape as possible for y'all to navigate.
I'm not participating in this mire and joy.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So yeah, great game. I think it'd be worth it to maybe deep dive it at some point if we continue to play it and enjoy it, because we've covered it a lot, but we haven't given the deep dive treatment, and it's an incredible game.
Yeah, I would be thrilled to do that, but I think we should try to play the auction variant a couple more times if we're going to do that.
So I mean, I'd be down. Like the thing that's really interesting is giving people agency over when scoring happens, because that can create a really interesting dynamic to the auction where somebody's like, oh, I want to score right now.
Yeah.
and other people don't. So yeah. Anyway, that's Tikal. And I think that's our episode on revisitability in games.
Yeah. Thank you so much to those of you who've made it to the end. If you've made it here, I bet you really enjoyed Decision Space.
Golden Geek.
Please nominate us on the Golden Geek for Best Podcast. We would appreciate it so much. We'll give you an update here later. Also, thank you to our patrons who support the show. If you want to learn more, you can visit decisionspacepodcast.com/Patreon.
Also, if we win or if we get the nomination, that gives us an excuse to do our top 10 games of all time episode.
Yeah, we'll just do it right after.
Silling. Yeah,
right after. Yeah, that's an incentive. Perfect.
Okay, awesome.
Cool.
Well, thanks everyone for listening to this week. As always, we'd like to thank Hembry for our intro and outro music. Reach out, and we'll see y'all next time. Goodbye.
Bye, y'all.